The Third Reich, the cost of a broken nation. The Third Reich promised a 1,000-year reign, but it lasted only 12 years. But in just 12 years, it plunged the entire world into the most horrific war in history and committed such heinous crimes that new words like genocide had to be coined to describe them. It all started with a huge humiliation. At the end of World War I, Germany lost much of its territory, was in debt, and was forced to take sole responsibility for the deaths of millions of people. The Treaty of Versailles did not just punish a country, it completely shattered a nation. And when someone dreams of rebuilding a broken nation, people follow them. The Great Depression of 1929 completed the work of destruction. 6 million people lost their jobs, and banks disappeared in the blink of an eye. In that time of utter despair, Adolf Hitler emerged, a failed artist and decorated soldier who understood a dangerous side of the human mind. Hurt people don't always want to hear the truth. They just want someone to blame for their suffering. He became chancellor in January 1933. Within weeks, the country's parliament building burned down. Hitler used the fire to take away people's civil liberties, to establish his own. He began to rule the country by order and rounded up opponents and took them to Dachau. The first concentration camp was opened just 2 months after his rule began. All other political parties disappeared before the summer arrived. Most German citizens did not protest because Hitler gave them something that no one else had given them for a long time: jobs, improved roads, and a new sense of self-respect. But this whole development was a big lie. It was built with secretly borrowed money and had only one goal: a terrible war. In 1938, he occupied Austria without a fight. Then he extended his hand to Czechoslovakia. On September 1, 1939, his tanks entered Poland. Denmark fell in a matter of minutes. Within 6 weeks, France had also surrendered, and by 1941, swastikas were flying in most of Europe. But Hitler was not satisfied with just victory. He wanted total annihilation. 6 million Jews were brutally murdered, along with millions of Roma, the disabled, and political prisoners. The killings took place in gas chambers. Inca Empire, Lord of the Andes. The Inca Empire had none of the wheels, iron, or a written language, yet they established one of the greatest empires in world history. At the great heights of the Andes Mountains, where the air is very light and the mountain peaks touch the clouds, a civilization arose that proved all conventional historical ideas about empire building wrong. By the early 16th century, the Incas ruled over 12 million people across 2,500 miles of mountains, deserts, and jungles, connected by 25,000 miles of vast roads they had built. This journey began around 1200, when a small tribe first settled in the valley of Cusco. For 2 centuries, they had no special identity. They were just a common group fighting for land and water in the hilly areas. Then came Emperor Pachacuti. In 1438, he seized power, defeated the enemy Chancas, and began to expand his empire at a pace never seen before in the Americas. From father to grandson, within 3 generations, the Incas conquered almost all of Western South America. They not only conquered the land, but also made the people of the region their own. Local leaders were brought to Cusco, educated, married into the Inca family, and then sent back to their homelands as representatives of the empire. They used to write down all the information without any alphabet using knotted ropes called quipu. They provided food for millions of people by cutting steps into the mountainside and cultivating it. Their empire had no money or markets, just a strange and beautiful system of labor exchange and mutual aid. This system was so advanced that it still amazes economists today. Their stone architecture was so skillful that even after 500 years, it is not possible to insert even an ordinary knife between those stones. Ottoman Empire, 6th century dynasty. The Ottoman Empire. In 1453, a 21-year-old sultan did something no general had done in 1,000 years. He conquered Constantinople. And to accomplish this impossible feat, He dragged his massive ships over mountains of mud. The vast walled city, surrounded by the waters of the Golden Horn, had defended itself against successive invasions for centuries. But the young Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II refused to accept the impossible. When his navy was unable to break through the harbor's chains and enter, he ordered 70 ships to be placed on wooden logs, lubricated with oil, and dragged over the mountains into the harbor. On May 29th, Constantinople fell. This marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of the Roman Empire, and the Ottomans asserted their power on the world stage. They had started their journey from almost nothing. Around 1299, a tribal chieftain named Osman established a small kingdom in northwestern Anatolia. For 100 years, his descendants spread their empire across the Balkans and Asia Minor, drawing others to their side through war, marriage, and alliances. Byzantine Empire, survivors of Rome. The Byzantine Empire. They called themselves Romans. They were proud of that name even 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. And to be honest, they weren't wrong. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 due to barbarian invasions, its eastern part not only survived, but grew stronger. Constantinople, the city that Constantine built on the ruins of a small Greek fishing village called Byzantium, once became the richest and most secure city in the world. While the whole of Europe was plunged into the Dark Ages, the Byzantines preserved Roman law, Greek learning, and Christianity with utmost compassion within their impenetrable walls. For 800 years, no force could breach that wall. Under Justinian in the 5th century, the empire reclaimed almost half of the old Roman world, including North Africa, Italy, and the Mediterranean, and Sophia, a church so large that people wept in amazement at its size. Justinian organized Roman laws so beautifully that even today, courts in Europe and Latin America follow that rule. At its peak, the empire was home to nearly 20 million people, and Constantinople's population surpassed that of any other Christian city of the time. But empires that survive in the face of adversity eventually come to believe they are immortal. The plague of the 5th century claimed the lives of millions and emptied their coffers. Egyptian Empire. Quest for eternity. It was the first major nation in the world to stand on nothing but rock, sand, and faith. They believed that time itself could be defeated. It began in 3150 BC, when Upper and Lower Egypt came under the same crown. The Nile River was the lifeblood of this civilization, flooding every year, bringing new life to the desert. And from this rhythm of nature, an empire was born. They considered their kings to be pharaohs, or gods in human form. They believed that pharaohs could rule not only the living, but also the afterlife. Every great monument and carved tomb they built was a promise of the afterlife. They did not build for a few years. Their construction was for eternity. Egypt reached its peak during the New Kingdom. Powerful pharaohs such as Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and Ramses II crossed the desert and conquered Nubia in the south and Canaan in the north. The great temples seemed to reach for the sky, and their gods, such as Ra, Osiris, and Amun, were considered immortal. But this immortality also had a weak point. The priests inside the temples became as powerful as the kings. The palaces became filled with corruption. The once regular floods of the Nile River became erratic. Crops failed, and people's faith began to waver. Just then, the rebellious pharaoh Akhenaten arrived. He abandoned all the old gods of Egypt and embraced only the sun god Aten. For a moment, he thought he would change the eternal law, but instead, he weakened the very foundation of his empire. Roman Empire, shattered dreams. The Roman Empire. Rome was not built in a day, nor was its fall sudden, but rather very slow. In the beginning, it was a dream in the dust, a small kingdom on the banks of the Tiber River, which dreamed of one day ruling the entire world. It is said that it was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus, who were raised by a she-wolf. It started out as a fairy tale and a prophecy, but one day, that story came true. Through strict discipline, a desire to grow up, and a love of honor, Rome grew from a small village into a vast empire that would guide the entire world for the next 2,000 years. By the 1st century, Rome had become the center of civilization. Its roads stretched for 50,000 miles, connecting more than 70 million people. Their well-disciplined armies marched with precision. Their laws became the standard of justice for the people, and the buildings they built stood tall and lifted their heads to the sky. The Colosseum, the Great Aqueduct, and the marble plazas were not just buildings. They were irrefutable proof of Rome's immortality. The first emperor, Augustus, began the Pax Romana, or 200 years of peace. Trade and commerce flourished, cities flourished with art and knowledge, and the shadow of Rome's imperial eagle spread from Britain to Egypt. Mongol Empire, world ruler. Mongol Empire. An empire is not always built of huge stones or great cities. Sometimes it is born from the dusty wind and the constant sound of horses' hooves. In 1206, a man named Temujin stood on the banks of the Onon River and took a new name, Genghis Khan, which means world ruler. What began as an alliance of nomadic groups later became the largest continuous land empire in the history of the world. This empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea and united two worlds that had never known each other before. In just a few decades, the Mongols conquered a vast area that the Romans could not have conquered in hundreds of years. Their horse archers roamed from one end of the world to the other with ghostly speed. Their war tactics were as brutal as they were extraordinary, and their ambitions were boundless. By the end of the 13th century, Mongol rule had spread over an area of about 9 million square kilometers. They did not stop at conquering, but rather united a divided world. Under their rule, the Silk Road was greatly developed, facilitating the exchange of new ideas and goods between East and West. It once seemed that the Mongolian peace, or Pax Mongolica, might never end, but empires built solely on war carry within them the seeds of destruction. The cracks were not caused by external enemies, but by internal disputes within the royal family. The British Empire, the decline of power. British Empire. There was a time when many parts of the map were covered in red. It was a powerful empire over which the sun never set, because somewhere in the world, the British flag flew in broad daylight. At its peak in 1920, the British Empire ruled over about a quarter of the world's population, or 410 million people, and it was spread over an area of 13.7 million square miles. From the hot deserts of Africa to the deep jungles of Asia, from the snowy north of Canada to the small islands of the Pacific Ocean, Britain was dominant everywhere. Their rise was due to a powerful navy, the Industrial Revolution, and indomitable determination. Their ships ruled the seas, their banks drove world trade, and their culture spread from continent to continent. The Pax Britannica, or British peace, ruled for a century. People thought it would be unwavering and last forever, but boundless ambition eventually became a wall for itself. The First World War shattered that illusion of permanence forever. Aztec Empire. City on the lake. Tenochtitlan was a vast city of 200,000 people built on water, connected to the mainland by a massive causeway. It had floating gardens and towering pyramids that faced the sky. By the early 16th century, it was a larger and more developed city than London or Paris. The Aztecs ruled over an area of 80,000 square miles, with about 5 million people. Their warriors were invincible. Their gods craved human blood, and to satisfy that need, they would extract the living hearts from the chests of enemies they conquered on the pyramids. But an empire built on fear alone always created enemies on all sides. The small tribes they conquered never forgot their suffering. The Tlaxcalans, who had been forced to abandon their children for 100 years, were looking for an opportunity to take revenge. That opportunity came in 1519, the year that the serpent god Quetzalcoatl was supposed to return according to their calendar. Persian Empire, King of Kings. In 550 BC, a prince named Cyrus defeated his own grandfather, the Median king, and led a successful rebellion. Over the next 20 years, Cyrus conquered Lydia and all its wealth, captured Babylon without bloodshed and built the largest empire in the world at that time. But Cyrus did not rule by terror. He freed the Jews from captivity. He gave the conquered nations the freedom to practice their own religion, laws, and language. The Persians affectionately called him Father, and history knows him as Cyrus the Great. His successors strengthened the empire further. Darius I expanded Persian rule over an area of 5 million square kilometers, from Egypt to India and from the Balkans to the Arabian Sea. He built a 2,500-kilometer-long royal road to connect major cities. He introduced such a rapid postal system that it took only a few days for news to reach from one end of the vast empire to the other. The Japanese Empire, the Rising Sun, and the Atomic Age. The Japanese Empire. In 1868, a teenage emperor named Meiji took over an old-fashioned kingdom ruled by samurai and shoguns. In just 50 years, Japan became the first Asian power to defeat a European nation in war, and in 1905, it crushed the Russian Navy at the Battle of Tsushima. By 1942, the Rising Sun flag was flying over Korea, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, and half of the Pacific Ocean. An island nation smaller than California controlled more than 1 billion people. But Japan made a huge miscalculation. On December 7, 1941, they attacked Pearl Harbor in the hope that America would turn to peace instead of war. Admiral Yamamoto, the mastermind of that attack, had studied in America. He warned his superiors that they were awakening a sleeping monster, but no one listened to him. Russian Empire. Fall of the Romanovs. Russian Empire. For nearly 200 years, the Romanov dynasty ruled the largest continuous landmass in the world. At its peak, Russia's borders stretched from Poland to the Pacific Ocean and from the Arctic to Afghanistan, covering 1/6 of the world's land area. Emperor Peter the Great brought a medieval kingdom into the modern world by building a new capital on a frozen swamp. Empress Catherine further expanded the empire by annexing Crimea and dividing Poland. By 1900, this vast empire had a population of about 125 million. But even though it looked very strong from the outside, with its golden domes and imperial eagle, Russia was slowly decaying on the inside. If you have been patient enough to read this far, thank you very much. Subscribe to our channel for more great stories like this, and let us know in the comments what other topics you would like to know about in the future.